In the first video we made 5 cards using our larger scraps. This time we're moving on to smaller scraps and we're going to begin with this card. So let's go. For this first card we need a 15cm square base card, and I've cut a coloured piece approximately 14cm square and a piece of the double-sided adhesive which is 13cm square. And what I'm going to do is adhere this and then trim it down. It's much easier to do that rather than trying to stick a 13cm square onto a 13cm square, which can all go horribly wrong. So let's peel off the backing. Peel off the backing and then stick it down. And I'm going to trim this, so whilst I'm trying to be straight, it's not crucial. Now, one thing I found when I was practicing was that I didn't have anything to hold on to. So what I'm going to do is trim off 3 sides and leave one that I can use to stick down onto my surface. So there we are, 3 sides trimmed, and I can use this side that I haven't trimmed to hold the piece in place. Otherwise I just found I was picking it up every time I put my fingers on the stickiness. So peeling back, in fact I might need sellotape, I think. I'll just use double-sided tape because I'm going to trim it off. Let's stick it down with some double-sided tape. There we go. There. Now if we look at this, it resembles the quilt pattern called log cabin. So we start with a square in the centre, fairly central to me. Okay, so we start with that. And then you need lots of strips of, I was going to say fabric because I've just been speaking about log cabin, but paper in this case. And I'm going to leave a little gap in between. So this is going to be a little bit different than my sample because I'm leaving the gaps and I'm going to cover those with the ultrafine glitter. Now it does mean a bit of, because I've stuck it down, I need a bit of dexterity to trim. Let's do this one, and I'll use the green side, and I'm going to go up to this new edge here and down to the end of the square and then trim it off. And I'm going to keep going round. You want strips from 4 colours, but of course with the DSP it's double-sided, so I've actually used 2 colours and used them the other way up each time. And each of the strips is between about 3/4 and 1.5 centimetres. So let's carry on. So now, you might be saying, well, that looks a right old mess, and you'd be right, but I'm going to trim it. The easiest way to do it is to turn it upside down and then use your trimmer. I've trimmed this down, getting rid of all the scraps which are going to be added to my box, not forgetting to trim off the side that hasn't got the sticky on it. I couldn't work out why it didn't look square originally, and then I realised that I needed to trim a bit more. So I've put it on a piece of scrap paper because I'm going to get the glitter out. And this is ultra fine clear glitter, which is really pretty. And I've used it in all sorts of ways with napkin decoupage and wintry scenes. And you can stick it with glue or onto strips of double-sided tape, but for this purpose I think the double-sided adhesive sheets work really well. And I'm pushing the glitter around and rubbing it in at the same time. So once you're happy with it, tap it, brush it a bit. Admire your hands as well as your handiwork. And you can still see the magenta colour coming through. It's a bit subtler because it's covered with the glitter, but it will still go very nicely with the designer series paper. Now on my first card I hadn't left those gaps, so what I did instead was to use the coordinating felt pens to draw some lines in between to define the pattern a bit more. Okay, so now this can be stuck onto the base card. Now I'm just going to put a little, do I want a little strip or a slightly, I think I want a slightly bigger bit behind, so I'm going to use some of this. I'll just stick my greeting on. Now my greetings for these cards, I've used this Framed for You set. I love the frame, and the little flower I've used inside my cards, and the leaf is really pretty as well. It's just a gorgeous set, and the words are just the sort of size I was looking for these cards. Not too obtrusive, but still legible. And I'm just going to put my flower on the inside as well. Stamp it off so it's not too dark, and there we are, a couple of flowers. There. For this next card we're going to carry on using strips of DSP, but this time I'm going to do it with glue instead of with a double-sided adhesive sheet, just to show that it can be done. Now I don't know how well you can see this, but this is actually a layer on top of the same colour of card, which means that I could neaten up the edges very easily and still leave a border around. So I've got my two pieces of the same colour, and out of the bottom piece I've cut out some of the decorative elements I want. So I've got a flower, a label, and there's my happy birthday ready to go on the label. So using the smaller of my two pieces, which is 10 by about 14.3, we're going to start the process. So I've got my strips, and I'm going to be quite random this time. So I'll start at the top, make sure you've got enough glue on, and fairly centrally, and I'm going from the middle down to the right hand side. And you always want straight bits butting up to each other. It doesn't matter what the other end looks like, but this end needs to be straight. And now that I've got those initial bits in, I can fill in the corners. Now if your pieces are very long, you might have need of them later, so just chop them off roughly, or chop them properly at the end. Okay, now you want to leave that a few minutes to set, and you might find it's worth squashing it down either with your hands or putting it under something to make sure that everything's well and truly stuck. So let's just lift it off carefully. And again, I'm going to turn to the back in order to trim. So there we are, that's looking a bit more respectable. And my leftover pieces are getting smaller and smaller, but they're all going to be added to my box to be used later on. Let's get up what we can. Right, so let's finish off this card. So this is going to stick onto this layer. And I want it flat because I want it to actually appear as one layer. And then I've got this little piece. Now, what I want to do is to trim my happy birthday to fit onto my label. And the way I'm going to do that is to apply some double-sided tape and stick it on centrally. And if you remember last time I showed you about using the post-it note trick, so I'm going to attach it to a post-it note quite firmly because I want this to work really well. I'm going to carefully. Now of course the sensible thing would have been to do my greeting, attach it and then punch out the piece, but I'd already punched out the piece, so I'm just getting it exactly in place, squeeze down part way until it holds and you can see that you're in the right place, and then go for it. And there we are, I've got the label exactly onto, sorry, I've got my greeting exactly on the label where I want it. I have to take off the remains of the post-it note, and then I'm going to stick it, I'm going to stick it down there. I could put it there, like so, or I could just stick it on the inside of the card, which I think is what I'm going to do. So there we are. So for this next card, we continue using strips of the designer series paper, and there's just a couple of tricks I want to show you along the way. So I've got a piece of this colour, which is Cinnamon Cider, which is actually quite a pretty brown colour if there is such a thing. Punched out a label and I'm just rounding the corners. And I've already embossed it with the Argyle embossing folder. Now I'm going to turn over to the back and put some double-sided tape around the edge of the aperture. And I'm going to start laying my paper down. Now, if you look at it on the front, the paper is going from top left to bottom right. So on the back it will go from top right to bottom left. So let's put the first piece in, and I'll just trim that off so that it doesn't extend beyond the end, and grab my next strips. And they can be any width of strip. So now I'm going to add some more double-sided tape so that I can stick this to my card. Now I want to finish off my aperture a bit more than it's finished there. As I have here, we've got a white bit around, but the punch is only one size, so how am I going to do that? Let me show you. I'm going to punch out a label, which I will keep for a later card, and then I'm going to move the punch up a little bit and cut off just a narrow bit. Now, a word of warning here, your hands need to be clean. So I've just repeated the process. I moved the paper again, and you could keep doing that till you get to the end of the card. But I only need a top and bottom piece. So, and then you want some glue, and here it helps to have glue with a fine nozzle. Going to find a little greeting or stamp out a little greeting. I'm tempted to put it there, but it might go down there actually. Yeah, go for it. Use the double-sided tape as I'm sticking onto embossing, and there we are. So for the final card for this video, we're again using strips of designer series paper, and I had a bit of a play following on from things that I'd seen on Pinterest, and I've done two like this, where I've just separated out a card front and put strips behind. Then I tried using one of the curvy dies that I mentioned earlier. These are the new curvy dies from Stampin' Up, and I used the plain curve. Then I thought, let's use this leafy curve. That's what I'm going to show you. So I started off with a piece of Whisper White that is 10 by 12 centimetres, and I've used this die to cut a piece out of the middle, like so. Now, I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do with that piece yet, but we'll put it to one side for now. And the way that this card works is that these two pieces are going to be stuck to the front of the card, and we'll have this gap in the middle to be filled with strips of paper. So I need to know how long my strips need to be. So I'm just going to use a pencil to lightly trace around this. So let's just put these to one side. Now I'm going to start at one end, and I'll probably leave little gaps in between my strips, and just making sure that they're long enough to cover my pencil marks. Close up the ink pad, and then make sure I know which way up I'm going, like that and like that. So I think I'll use glue so that I can get into all the funny shapes and make sure that they're well stuck down. And I've got a plaque and this, which I'm going to put that way around. I think I'll do it just like that. Like so. And sending love and hugs, and I think I'll put a little jewel there. Use a slightly bigger one this time. I'm just gonna make it look like rivets on my label. There. There's the card. In the next video, we'll be using up some of the tiny scraps that we've created in making these cards so far. So I hope you'll join me for that. Goodbye.